Civilization began to emerge in Africa from the pathways leading to it during the last 60 centuries. Not long ago, measured against the 2 million years that humans have lived on Earth, the word civilization comes from the Latin civitas, meaning town or city. Unlike villages and herders' camps, towns, some even smaller than this rural town in Madagascar, had not existed previously. A town is a settlement of mostly unrelated strangers. They cannot depend on kinship obligations to govern their relations with each other. They are not self-sustaining. They need distant strangers to produce some or all of their food and raw materials. No change in human intellect and human nature or morality came with civilization. But these two problems, settlements made up of strangers and settlements that were not self-sustaining, were new, and their outcomes were unprecedented. Townspeople did many different things that required interaction with non-kin. Tanners depended on others for these skins, as did the many who worked with fiber, fabric, and dyes. There might be brickmakers and other workers with clay. Some might be stonemasons, as in Egypt, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, or jewelers. There were sellers and buyers. And there were slaves. Slavery came with civilization. Slavery had not existed in the older village and herding societies. In this 1859 photograph, a slave sale is shown taking place in Zanzibar, with David Livingstone looking on. Then, as now, in certain towns lived state executioners. There were priests, as in the Congo, and Ethiopia, one of the first states in the world to adopt Christianity as the official religion. priestesses, as here in Ghana, shrine attendants, copiers of sacred texts, religious scholars and students, officials with many different duties had houses in towns. Here, a crier announces the king's procession. Like our advance men, makers of weapons lived in towns. And military officers. At the capitals resided the royals. In Egypt, Dahomey, Cameroon, Swaziland, Bornu, Madagascar, Lesotho, and elsewhere. Where did all these townspeople, whether potter or prince, obtain food? Some inhabitants, even of capital towns like the Ashanti Empire's Kumasi, part of which appears in this 1887 photograph, continued to farm on its outskirts. More recently, fields were still being planted in an old Nigerian city. Even in the slums of large cities today, some migrants try to bring a measure of food security with them. But as towns grew, their inhabitants came to depend more and more on food and many other supplies brought in by strangers from outside. A town's survival depended on access routes remaining passable and safe. But if supplies were stopped or diverted, could a town retain its inhabitants, or a king his crown? Or if civil peace broke down, and inhabitants or incoming traders were unable to conduct their business peacefully? Problems of ensuring supplies and civil peace were of a new order. How were they to be solved? In the small communities that had existed for thousands of years before civilization, food and other supplies were locally produced. Problems came before the male heads of the community's families meeting as a group. When a decision required enforcement action, younger men were detailed to provide it. One's relatives or in-laws were the government. With the emergence of towns, this was no longer possible. Now, the highest authority was a single human being upon whom the fate of an entire population rested. People would consider themselves honored to carry this person so that his feet did not touch the ground. Nor his mother's feet, nor those of his principal officials. Could an ancient hunter have imagined scenes like this? Or this, a Swazi queen crossing a shallow stream? Or this, how from a continent of self-sustaining, self-governing small human groups did there begin to form, about 6,000 years ago, much larger human groups, kingdoms and also empires in which many languages were spoken, where a leader, as in Egypt, would be proclaimed a living god, or where the leader's face was kept hidden from public view, as in the Oyo Empire, or whose voice was never heard in public, who communicated only through officials who were identified by special staffs of office, as in the Shanti. Who in times past could have foreseen the great differences in wealth and position that civilization would produce? Indeed, how did civilization and the human pyramids that characterize it come about? We don't know the circumstances that led to our upright form of locomotion. We don't know how agriculture came into being. We don't know what started people towards civilization. But actual events recent enough to have been reported to anthropologists do suggest how a pathway might once have been taken towards the world we know. This pathway might have begun when a few refugees from a disaster, hungry and threadbare, reach a farming settlement. They find someone willing and able to take them in, a prosperous man whose herd and crops have flourished. He shows them where they can build their shelter. He permits them to take milk from some of his cattle, gives them some grain to tide them over. They are relieved to find themselves with hope again. Willingly, they expand his fields and hoe and weed them. His house also they keep in repair. They even enlarge it so that it is bigger than any of his neighbors. They perform for him all manner of tasks, producing a surplus for trade. They are prepared to run his errands. They don't want to find themselves again, alone and hungry in the wild. They back him against opposition. They have no families here. He is their sole protector in the settlement. He calls them his children. The refugees might include childbearing women. He might marry them inexpensively. Their parents are not around to claim dowries. He multiplies obedient sons and daughters. He has now brought food enough by them that he must expand his storehouses. With this, and with the nutritious beer made from the grains his clients have grown and brought before him, and the increase of his cattle acquired from his daughters' dowries, He is able to add to his reputation for generosity by providing, on occasion, feasts both for his followers and neighbors. He is treated with increasing respect. Some refugees he has taken in might have committed crimes and fled their old communities to escape punishment, or they may have been banished from them. But whatever their origin, their benefactor is left more prosperous, so that he can extend his helping hand to even more of those in need of help, thus multiplying his followers, enhancing his prestige, increasing his power.
Ayo mama, ene namziga ba upangile. Ayo manda batanda, ene ne bao, ene ngangoli bafana ndeni, ene jinele, ina mukwele ndabatanda bantwana, tikolele bute, ene ngate tinda etandaza.